Good afternoon, friends, and welcome. Can you hear the sea? I think the tide must have come in because I can hear the sea quite well from here. It's very nice. I'm used to living near the sea, having lived on a beach for 3 years in a van. This is very reminiscent of that on occasions, but without the buffeting. I had a lot of buffeting in the van. It used to wobble a lot with the winds, and the sea used to crash over the van, hence its poor condition and its need to go to the scrapyard in the end. But there we are. This is anicca, impermanence. Vans, cars, rust. But they all start off new. We all start wanting them in that condition. I have just come down from the temple up there at the top of this beautiful mountain, forested mountain. Today here in the forest I discovered a new way you can die. I wasn't standing there, but just where I filmed the snake, I came back from sweeping and there was a huge limb of an old dead tree crashed across the path, which I was able to drag into the side, but quite heavy. Now, you probably would have heard it coming, and hopefully if you dived the right way it would have missed you if you'd been in its way. But if you hadn't, it would have been a sure end. But not like in India, where I lived in the coconut grove. Those coconuts, now they would come without any warning. There'd be no creaking, no crashing, no hitting other branches. They came at you like cannonballs. And that was sheerly odds that kept you alive with those things. I don't know how there are not more fatalities in such a place. But they would regularly fall. And they come from a huge height. So the momentum and the weight is quite phenomenal. If one of those bashes you on the bonce, you're sure to be a goner, or at least have a very serious headache. So these are beautiful. Someone sent a comment saying, am I staying here for the Vasa, the rainy season? And I said, of course I'm not sure, but this is, and I have really no plans, but that is what I'm expecting or anticipating. And he said, because it seems so beautiful and peaceful. And well, I couldn't resist the temptation to reply, yes, it is. And he said, shady. I said, but it is extremely hot, extremely humid, often very wet. There are very many snakes, very many mosquitoes, all manner of other creatures. I didn't mention the ants and the termites that are within this kuti. And my new problem, which is up in the corner above my Buddha Rupa here, my statue, my little shrine, which you can't see, in the roof void, which has been boarded off, it's being used either as a rat or gecko or both toilet. So at certain times the smell in here is quite overpowering. It's quite horrible. Not sure there's anything you can do about it. But there we are. This is part of forest life. So I'll move on. It's questions and answers. There's quite a few questions, but I'll just tackle them slowly, and I can't promise I can always answer your questions, but I can certainly share with you my point of view. And they are good opening points for discussion, always. So I always welcome these questions. I always welcome your comments. And I'm very grateful for all of the appreciation you show in those comments, the gratitude. And I will also welcome any suggestions you have because after all, this is not my channel, so to speak. I did set it up, albeit accidentally, but it's not for my benefit. It's not even for my friends and family's benefit. It has grown organically as a result of your interest, you viewing the videos, the talks, you subscribing to the channel, and your comments and questions giving me encouragement to continue making these recordings, giving these talks. So without that, there would be no channel. So it's your channel. If you have suggestions, the videos should be longer, should be shorter, should be not at all, or anything particularly. You do give me lots to talk about, so that's never a problem, finding things to talk about. But anything particularly you'd like to suggest, and I will also appreciate any criticism, anything you don't like that you think is incorrect. Now, we have a lot of rules. I've just come from the temple at the top of the mountain there, because it's the Uposatha today, the Buddhist Sabbath, one Phra, Monk's Day, our time for a confession, which I've spoken about, so I won't go into the detail, and for us to listen to one monk reciting the recitation of the Patimokkha, which is the 227 Bhikkhu rules. And today, that recitation was given by the new Ajahn here, who's very young, who recited it extremely quickly, because they learn this and they can do it so perfectly. It has to be absolutely word for word perfect. There is someone reading it and checking to pick them up if it's not. And he recited it beautifully within half an hour. It can take usually about 40 minutes, so it can take a lot longer, and can get a little boring. I've sat through it here now, getting on for a dozen times. That's nearly 12 times, having been here for over 6 months. We've only missed a couple. We need at least 4 bhikkhus, so including myself, with the new arrival, the Ajahn, whom I'm assuming is here to stay for the Vasa, the 3 months coming up from full moon, 1st or 2nd rather of August, then, which is the next Uposatha, I think, so in 15 days, 2 weeks now until this lockdown that monks have. So if you imagine it, 380,000 or something there are monks in Thailand are all going into lockdown. You could say voluntarily, but it's not really. It's involuntary. We don't have any choice. It has to be done. And all around the world, all of those monks, bhikkhus, are in lockdown for 3 months. They have to stay in the same place, all at the same time. There's a little ceremony before and a big ceremony after, called the Katina, which we'll talk about nearer the time. And that varies from monastery to monastery, country to country also. But all the monks will be in lockdown, not going anywhere, save for the occasional emergency. When you can leave the monastery, go away for 6 nights, but no longer. So that means you could go away for 7 days, but you have to be back by the evening. So at the latest, our days run from dawn to dawn. So therefore you can work it out. It's 6 days, so that's 6 nights. So that's if someone was ill that you had to attend to, a family member, or died, a funeral, something like this. There's this exception, or your own ill health. Otherwise you lose that vasa, that birthday, that year. It's added on to your this is how you know how long a monk's been a monk. It's recorded on how many vasas you have spent that way. So the questions, and consequently it's quite hot, so again I'm in my relaxed mode of this robe has just been thrown over my shoulder for sake of decency, and it is also appropriate that the robe is on you somehow, even in this relaxed format. Okay, questions? Oh, did I check the time before I began? No, but there we go, it doesn't matter. I'm thinking I've probably spoken for at least 10 minutes, but let me start off with a nice quick question. Oh, this is a really quick one. Sorry to be picking, but I need to warm up. How did you get a place at a monastery? So that's a quick one, easy, I just walked in. Actually, as a monk, as a bhikkhu, you can just walk into more or less any monastery of your tradition, Theravada. And it's a little bit more difficult if you come from a Theravada background and you're not used to, say, the Thai Forest tradition. If you were to walk into a Thai Forest Monastery, so for instance, all monks in Thailand, I think, well, I suppose 99.9% of them are Theravada Buddhist monks. But the city monks and the forest monks are different traditions, and within the forest monks there are different traditions also. And this is determined by the different rules that are added on top of the ordinary Vinaya of behaviour and mannerisms and routines within the monastery. Now, having trained in the monastery just up the road from here, which is of the same tradition as this monastery, I was able to walk into this monastery unannounced. They will always allow you to stay for a few days, in which time they get to know you and see your behaviour, that you're familiar with the routine, and then they will allow you to stay a little longer, usually a week. And then once you've stayed for a week, they might say, oh, do you plan on staying much longer? In fact, with me, they said all this in the first few days, but I think that was because it's a very small monastery with there were just the 2 monks here with me then. And I said, well, it's up to you. I'd like to stay as long as I'm welcome. And they said, well, okay, yes, you're very welcome. But the point being, if you know the routine, you turn up and you make yourself invisible. You stick to the core what. This is the bylaws, all of the rules of the monastery, which, if you know its tradition, this is an Ajahn Chah tradition monastery. I know the Ajahn Chah core what, so I know how it will work here. You stick to that absolutely. Of course you stick to the precepts, 227 bhikkhu rules, absolutely. And you go to all of the chanting sessions or pujas, however they may be, and you chant in the fashion, however that may be, that they chant in. You don't try and do anything your way, you just blend in. You never ask this is how I do it. You ask me, how did you get a place at the monastery? Yes, not how does one get a place at the monastery. So this is how I do it, because I've done this quite a few times, going to different monasteries. I never ask for anything. It doesn't matter how much I need it, I don't ask. I might hint, which sounds a little bit iffy, but not really. You don't have to hint in an obvious way, but you just stand around, you blend in, but you make sure you're around at the appropriate time. So for instance, when the samanera, the novice, the neem as he's called here, is giving out some toothpaste or something like that, and you need toothpaste, you listen out for these little signs, and you make sure you're around at that area, and you sort of stand there looking a little bit needy, and he's sure to offer you some toothpaste. Now, my principle behind this is, if I'm forever bothering people asking them for things, you're going to get noticed for the wrong reasons. If you never ask and you never bother anyone for anything, and this can equally apply in ordinary life. I've done this in workplace environments, I've done this in business as well, successfully. There's always this emphasis on closing in business, you know, and how you close a sale. But there are very many ways to do that. And again, this might sound a little bit manipulative, let's say. What do they call these people? Mentalists. But these tricks of the trade are also something that's been around throughout history, and something that's been developed subconsciously within our very beings, and we're born with this ability to get what we need as a baby. We just cry, and then we learn to temper these desires or these requests down to the asking politely, and eventually just being in the right place at the right time will bring you what you want. You can be asking for it internally and you will receive. So this sounds a little bit of a long and complicated answer to a simple question, but this blending in means you're not troublesome, you're not bothering them all the time, and you do get what you need, because in all of these monasteries they're very careful to look after you. The first thing they'll ask you is, do you have enough requisites? So you make sure that you get everything that they're offering you that you need, and no more at that time. And we need so very little. Now, I have seen many monks come and go, and I've seen them forever knocking on the door of the Samanera down there, and he doesn't mind at all. That's why he's there, to give them what they need, offer them things, and all sorts of requests here and there. But as I say, they've come and gone. By blending in and just going with the flow of the routine, because you don't see the people who have lived here for many years, well, there's only a few, the Ajahns asking for things all the time. It just happens naturally. You just blend in. And the Buddha's expression of this, of communities living in harmony, was always blend like milk and water, not like oil and water, you see, which doesn't mix. So when you go to a monastery, you think of yourself as milk in water, blending in. Then you get a place at a monastery. When I was at Mahabodhi, my main monastery in India, I'd been there for a couple of years. And at the end of some function, program, annual event or something, the abbot there, he's not called the abbot in that there, but whatever, the abbot, the main man, said, he introduced me or mentioned me or something, and he said he never asks for anything. As if that was some amazing feat, which I've got, but it's what I've got used to. It's also how I was trained. I was trained this way, also in monastic life, but it's something that I did kind of apply in my business life previous to this. So how did I get a place in the monastery? You become invisible, you blend in, and you do everything exactly the way they do it already. Don't try and stand out, improve, be different, or bring what you think you have to the table. No one's interested. They like it just the way it is. And it really is the ingredients to a much happier and contented existence. Being milk blending with water, just really settling in and receiving what's offered and requiring no more. After all, we have any medicine we need, we have our robes, we have the shelter, and we're fed every day. That's all we need to survive. That was a long answer for a very short but very good question. I think this question might be related to another one, but anyway, it's, as usual, unplanned. What is the relationship between time spent in Samadhi and depth of Samadhi? I have edited these questions a little bit because I want to get to the point of the question, rather than, if the context is appropriate to the question, I'll include the context, but I've just spent a little time, well, I say that, I edited a few of them, not very well because I can't find anything, but that's besides the point. What is the relationship between time spent in Samadhi and depth of Samadhi? So, I mean, you can imagine lifting weights, training, a weightlifter, training to lift weights. He would spend a long time training to lift weights and getting them heavier and heavier as he trains over many months and years. And then finally the big test comes along. He's in the big weightlifting tournament and he has the biggest and heaviest weight, and he goes to this, wherever it is, what you call it, and he lifts his weights up quickly like this, does this, lifts them up and puts them down again very quickly, just done like that, achieving what he spent months and months doing in a very short time, and putting the heavy weight down again. So developing samadhi is a training, a practice. It's something we do in order to sharpen our mind, like sharpening a knife. If you cut a tomato with a blunt knife, it's all squishy. With a sharp knife, it slices through smoothly. Now, by sharpening our mind, our focus, through the practice of sitting in meditation and developing samadhi, we are also, like a sharp knife, able to cut through our lives more smoothly, more quickly, more effectively, because we remain more focused, and as a result of this develop the other half of meditation, which is mindfulness, sati. Samadhi and sati go together like two sides of the same hand. So the relationship between time spent in samadhi and the depth of samadhi is such that the time spent in samadhi is the practice, is the training. The depth of samadhi is the result. So if we spend a lot of time practicing and training, like the weightlifter, you will achieve greater depths of samadhi, like lifting the heavy weight, but not necessarily just by sitting for a long time. It's the quality. So at first we won't necessarily achieve great depths of samadhi, but we keep practicing, developing samadhi, and we will achieve levels of samadhi, sort of neighborhood concentration, as they call it, and access, and then more into absorption, these states of samadhi, naturally, as our minds adjust to the training through the practice. But it may not be for very long, but eventually it will come to a stage where you can sit and in a short while go into deep states of samadhi, and this is what we're practicing to achieve. So like the weightlifter, with lots of practice he can go to the heavy weight, lift it and put it down. With lots of practice of meditation you can sit down, close your eyes and go deep into samadhi in no time at all. So the relationship is such that the time spent is the practice and the training, the depth is the results. I hope that answers that question. Is the result of non-virtuous mental karma mental suffering or physical suffering? So that's an interesting question. Okay, so just in case you don't know, for new listeners, karma is karma just means action. So all of our actions of body, speech and mind, good or bad, have consequences, which we call vipaka, meaning consequences or the results of karma. So if you do good things happen. If you do bad things happen. You reap what you sow. Now, you're specifically saying the result of non-virtuous, so bad behavior, mental karma. So I said body actions of body, speech and mind. Of course, the mind is the forerunner of all things. So if you continuously have a mind that's thinking bad things or negative things, is judgmental, for instance, critical, anti this, anti that, it's looking for problems that aren't even there. And specifically your question is asking that is mental, so non-virtuous, so let's just call it bad mental karma, going to result in suffering of a mental kind, so have bad results of just a mental kind. First and foremost, yes, because you're developing unwholesome mind states rather than developing wholesome mind states, and the result of developing unwholesome mind states is just that. You will have unwholesome mind states of not contentment, not tranquility, not peace, not joy, not even happiness. So they are the mental states. But yes, because the mind is the forerunner of all things, this will also develop physical responses. And a negative mental attitude will always produce negative physical responses. I mean, the most obvious thing is, if you think really negative thoughts about tasks you have ahead of you, the day you have ahead of you, you start to physically feel weak, you feel lazy. If you think you're going to have a horrible day and your alarm goes in the morning, you might hit snooze and not even want to get up. Many people with depression suffer from a loss of appetite, a loss of inclination to do anything, and even look after their bodies, maintain their sort of cleanliness or their whatever. These things can and will have, yes, physical effects. So the answer is it's both for those reasons. It's a good question. And that's a very good question. The next one, sorry, you can't read my mind. This is about drawing a comparison between where I was living up a mountain in rural India to now. And that's a talk in itself, so I'm going to put that one aside for now. Actually, I've given you a reply, subscriber. The jury is still out on this one. I will talk about this in I said the next video. It'll be in the next one maybe. You see, living as a monk in India is very different to living as a monk in Thailand. More so than, say, living as a monk in England, which sounds, well, you wouldn't expect that maybe. But if you live as a monk in England, you are restricted really to living in a monastery of a similar nature to, say, this monastery. So my monastery, Chittaviveka in England, the Thai Forest Monastery, it has the same core what that I spoke of earlier, Ajahn Chah rules, as this one. So when I went there for the first 3 days, it was the same as coming here for the first 3 days. Apart from nature and the temperature and the language, the monastery, the running of it, the procedure is the same. But in India that is all different. And also in India, as you mentioned, rural India, living up a mountain, I was wandering. I was on Tudong. Tudong is where you go wandering and walking with no particular place to go, or you could have a place to go, but you are practicing. Tudong is actually the Thai word for a wandering monk. It actually comes from Dutanga, the Pali word. Dutanga is the practice of a more ascetic way of, not aesthetic, that's beautiful, ascetic way of life. Ascetic. I'll say it again for my benefit, not yours. So austere, that could be. So there are 13 allowable Dutanga practices the Buddha said were acceptable, because he was trying to bring the practice away from the really harsh austerities that he experienced and gone through for 6 years prior to his enlightenment and hadn't worked, when he discovered it was the middle path. So not the life of luxury and not the life of, well, horror in his case. He was emaciated, nearly died just eating 1 grain of rice a day. if ever you've seen the little statues of him with the ribs. And I've been to his cave in India where he lived, where he was this thin, just before he went to Bodh Gaya and became enlightened, but on the way was given a meal of sweet milk rice for nourishment. And at that point it was considered by the other ascetics, monks of the time practicing these harsh austerities, that he'd failed, he'd given up. But he needed this nourishment for his body, and he realized it was the middle way. So when he sat under the Bodhi tree for this time and he became enlightened, it was on not a full tummy, but he'd had some nourishment. Without that, it wouldn't have necessarily happened. He would have perhaps died. He still had to live in a physical body. So where did all that come from? I've got onto this question because it's such an interesting question and would make a whole talk of its own. And I was wandering around on Tudong, so yes, practicing these Dhutanga practices, which include sleeping under a tree or in a cave or just outside under the stars. Now, outside under the stars was very much my preference, eating just one meal a day. There, you don't necessarily go on alms round because they don't know Buddhist monks so well. In some areas they do, but the majority of India is Hindu, so they're used to other kinds of monks, sadhus and such like. And even Jains, but not so much Buddhist monks going on alms round. Here, you just walk on alms round anywhere and you get the right food at the right time, in the right way. There, they're not sure. They'll give you food. You'll always get fed because they're used to monks. But we're not allowed to eat raw food. We're not allowed to accept money, and we're not allowed to, or handle money. We're not allowed to cook, so hence the raw food. So, and there's ways in which it needs to be offered. But in India you can go and get prasad, which is food offered by Hindu temples. So the whole environment of India is very different for monks compared to, say, in a monastery, within a monastery in England, and in a monastery or in Thailand on Tudong. In England on Tudong, well, it will be different again, because of course mostly people are not so aware of what you are in England too, but possibly more so as a result of YouTube and the very successful Theravada Buddhist monasteries that are there nowadays in England, probably more so than some parts of India. But still, that is something I can talk about, I think, at some length, because there are, I suppose, if this I've been here for 6 months, there are equally as probably many videos and talks on this channel based when I was in India as there are in Thailand. But in Thailand I've just been in this one place, whereas in India I was all in different places all of the time. And that's what the subscriber is referring to, and drawing the comparison between the two. And my answer was, well, the jury's out on that one, because it's early days. I don't know. I've been here for 6 months. I was doing that in India for 3 years. Yes, 3 years running around in India. I know the videos only go back less than a year, but I've been living in India all of the time for 3 years. Before that, I was in Cambodia for a short while and England for a short while, and then before that 5 years more or less in Thailand. So India was a big part of my life, both monastically and before I was a monk, many years ago now. When I first was investigating Buddhism, I went to India, to the Buddhist holy places, to learn what it was all about and really get the feel and understand Buddhism for what it is, and how it could or may not suit me, and which traditions were going to really help me in what I thought then I was trying to achieve. So that was the start of my Buddhist life. And then after many years training in Thailand, it was the continuation of my Buddhist life, including my ordination in Bodh Gaya, and then another year there as a bhikkhu, still on Tudong, but visiting on these Vipassana days, every 15 days having to return to a monastery at least, but usually my main monastery. Long distances on many long bus journeys overnight to always be back for this important recitation of the Patimokkha rules. I couldn't miss one of these fortnightly, every 15 days, new moon and full moon occasions. So wherever I was in India, I'd get back to Bangalore Monastery for this night only, and then return. So after this recitation, like just now at this time, I'd be on a bus going back to my coconut grove, for instance, which would be a 12 or 14-hour bus, nighttime bus journey, public government bus, all the way across the state to where I was living in a coconut grove in that kuti there. And then the following 15 days later, back on a night bus to be early morning into the monastery in Bangalore, the other side of the state, for my meal. I had to be there in time to have my meal, of course, because otherwise I wouldn't eat that day. And then the Patimokkha in the afternoon, and then back on a bus again overnight. So it was a very different life. And I here am doing almost the complete opposite of all of that activity. But I remain the same, or what I perceive as this monk. The mental states, the thoughts, are probably having to react to less, but the thinking is still there. The job, the practice, this practice is about eradicating greed, hatred and delusion. And the less activity, the less distractions, the more obvious they become, the more pronounced they become, but the more focus you can have on trying to eradicate them through the practice of developing these wholesome mind states, eradicating those unwholesome mind states. That's just touching on the surfaces of the differences between the two, because there's so much more to talk about when you compare Indian Buddhism to Thai Buddhism. Underlying it all is the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. That is the important thing always to remember. I have taken refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, and that is my home, whether it be in India, Thailand, England, or wherever I may go in the future. I'll move on to another short question, because I could talk about that subject all day, all night, and I'm not really sure how much longer I've got here on this conversation. When I started, that was 40. Yes, I'm going to have to wrap up soon. Okay, well, sort of a light-hearted one. Let's take it in a light-hearted way. May a layperson who supports a sangha and practices the 5 precepts extensively robe themselves, or is the process from one monk to another? I've written a long answer here, but you don't want to hear this long answer. No, you can't. A layperson can't. In a non-Buddhist country, you can do what you like, wear what you like, call yourself what you like. Especially these days, in these very, what do you call it? Forgive me, I'm not very up to date with all of this. I don't even know how to say what I'm thinking. What you call people, whether they're men or ladies or cats or dogs or things, you know. Regardless of this whole conversation of sexuality, it's nothing to do with that, but you could just walk around in monk's clothes or police clothes or army clothes or any kinds of uniforms, I suppose, if you wanted to, in certain situations, no problem at all. But But I think you're asking, you know, officially what you can do. Can you ordain each other as lay people? Maybe that's what you're asking. I mean, the fact is, I can't even robe another person, put it that way. Ordination has to be done, performed by a bhikkhu of a minimum of 10 years. I thought it was 12 years, but I heard 10, so I'm going with the 10, because that's probably, I can't remember where I heard it, but it seemed that where I heard it, they would know. So anyway, you have to be a bhikkhu, an ajahn of 10 years. I know in those Hindu traditions they have to be 12 years. That's probably where I got the 12 from. But before you can ordain someone, and also they have to have a certain training. It has to be done in a very special place. Where we recite in the temple, it's a beautiful, great big temple at the top of the hill up there. Huge temple, just 4 monks were sitting in the middle, just around. We have to set everything out exactly in a specified manner. The mat's in a certain position, facing a certain way, a glass of water, the scriptures, everything all perfect like this, in this huge temple, just for 4 monks. Why? Because that is the sacred place. It's called the Sima. This is only where the recitation of the Patimokkha, the 227 rules, can take place on this day, the Uposatha day. Similarly, the only situation whereby someone can be ordained. So when I was ordained in Bodh Gaya, I wasn't ordained in our branch monastery in Bodh Gaya, because I had to be ordained in the official Bodh Gaya Sima monastery, with the Sima, with my brother monks ordaining with me, by a monk of my upacharya, so preceptor, who ordained me, was of specific training and qualifications and many, many vasas, 30 or 40 years in the robes, to perform this ordination. So far from it was he just an ordinary layperson saying, hey, wear these robes, you're now a monk. This can't really be done. So in answer to your question, no, you can't do that, even if you're observing the 5 precepts very strictly. Because of course, as soon as you ordain, you are taking on the responsibility of keeping 227 precepts. So you can't just give someone these robes and say, that's it, you've got 227 precepts to adhere to now, and I just stick to 5. So also in Buddhist countries, such as here, Cambodia, Laos, those 3 specifically, possibly also in Burma and Sri Lanka, but I've not been there, so I can't speak of those. You are required to, as a monk, have a license, or at least your ordination certificate and papers, which specify all of the details about your ordination, and prior to that, your pabaja, your novice ordination, the monastery, your teacher, your preceptor, whom was present at your ordination. So all of these things can be checked. There has to be addresses and phone numbers. So I needed all this information just to come to Thailand dressed like this, because you would be also picked up by the local authorities in these countries and questioned if there was any doubt. I mean, obviously there's many monks here, so you'd have to perhaps be doing something, maybe walking around in the afternoon. You don't see monks wandering outside of cities, near city monasteries, in rural areas in the afternoon, for instance. Now someone would be well within their rights to say, you know, what are you doing? Are you all right? Can I help you? And if they had doubts, check your authenticity. So where they had problems with fake monks in many countries, not long back, probably it's gone on back forever, but more recently it's been noticeable in the tourist industry around places like Angkor Wat and such like in Cambodia, and possibly even in Bodh Gaya, fake monks, so people dressing up as monks to collect money. Well, the first way you can tell a fake monk is if he's asking for money, you know, on his alms bowl, getting money put into it. Even if he's offering a service like chanting or giving you malas, selling you malas, because one of our main rules The 10th precept is we mustn't handle money. And this, in order to stop this, they licensed monks. So you have a license here in Thailand, in Cambodia, for a monk. And without that license, in Cambodia, I know the specific fines and things, because it's well publicised. It's up to 3 months in prison and a $600 fine for wearing the robes, and you're not having a license, you're not being properly ordained. Now the point of this is people would be incredibly offended. It's disrespectful to not only the country's religion but their constitution to wear the robes of a monk if you're not one. Now I'm not, by any means, this is a very innocent question, I'm not addressing you in particular, I'm just talking openly about the subject, okay? It was a good question, and just the answer is no, you can't do that. You could do that, but what would be the point? You can't just walk around pretending to be a monk any more than you can walk around pretending to be a vicar of the Church of England, a priest of the Catholic Church, a policeman, or an officer of the army in any kind of uniform. It's inappropriate, whatever environment you're in. But in the country you're in, impersonation of, say, a police officer is a criminal offence, as is impersonation of a monk in Cambodia or Thailand a criminal offence. So, on that point, I should wrap up these questions and answers, because I'm sure that's time. And as I just mentioned, that I found when I was looking through this, no, I think that should suffice for now, time-wise. Otherwise, this overheating problem will cut me off. Uploading will be a problem. So I will wish you many blessings with metta. May you be happy and well. May your practice be fruitful and happy on the path towards Nibbana. Namo Buddhaya.